All right, welcome folks to today's Brown Bag. Today's topic is advanced budgeting. As we go along in the presentation, I will stop and ask for questions. Go ahead and type your questions in the questions box as you go. I'll have specific points in time when I stop for questions, but I can also take questions as we're going, and my lovely assistant Brooke will be monitoring those so she can catch my attention if it's needed. Otherwise, everyone is muted just to help control the noise on the webinar. So, advanced budgeting.
Jess, are you going to share your screen too?
I thought I was.
Oh, it's okay.
Thank you very much. It says I'm on air. Let me turn it off and then try turning it back on again. Oh, wait.
I can see it, but it looks more.
Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
There we go. I had the wrong screen. I have multiple screens. Now everybody knows what I listen to on my iTunes. Thankfully, I don't think any of it's embarrassing. All right. Thanks for Brooke. Thanks for fixing that for me, or catching my attention for that. All right. So let's go ahead and start talking about budgeting. In OneNFP Financials and Financials Lite, you've got two options for how you get your budget into the software. What we call basic budgeting and advanced budgeting. Basic is what most clients are using right now. You create a journal entry through the Gen Journal and post it. Either you import your entries into the journal or you enter them manually. Advanced budgeting is a tool, we also call it BudgetVision, and it allows you to desegregate your budgeting process, to get your managers involved to enter their own budget. So let's take a look. I want to look in the online help for a moment because this will help us when we talk about the two types of budgeting. So let's go into BudgetVision. And so the idea behind BudgetVision, you have a budget plan, and within that plan, you create subplans, and the subplans are what each individual manager will be working with. And you can define a specific set of accounts and funds and dimension values that are only what that manager needs to be looking at. Then the manager, so here's the plan and the subplans underneath it. Then each manager can create as many different versions that they want, trying different combinations. They can base it off of last year's budget. They can base it off of historical spending. They can take last year's budget and increase it by 5%. They can start with a completely clean slate, start with zero amounts, and enter manually for themselves. They'll do that till they get to a final version that is what their budget, and then submit it. So each subplan will, at the end, have one version that is submitted. And when all the subplans have a single version submitted, then you can post the overall budget. And there are paths back and forth where you can send it back to the manager if you say, guess what, you're over budget, go back and revisit this, and go back and forth while you refine it. But at the end, you post it to the ledger. When you post, and I want to make sure this is clear, when you post, it becomes a budget transaction in the general ledger that is exactly like the kind of budget you would post through basic budgeting using the Gen Journal. So from a reporting perspective, the end result of basic or advanced budgeting is the same. There's no difference in that end of it. It's just in giving the managers the ability to come in and start working on their own budgets, saving your staff the time of doing it themselves. So let's switch over to the software. Well, before I do, let me pause here for a moment, see if there are any questions about just the idea, the concept that we're going to be talking about today. Okay, looks like we're good. All right, so let's switch over to the software. I'm going to come over here to budgeting. All right, so when we're looking at the items here in budgeting, this last one is what you use when you are doing the basic budgeting, when you're entering through the Gen Journal. for all the budget transactions, you need to associate the entries with a budget plan so that the software, when you do your reporting, knows the difference between an entry for this year's budget versus last year's budget. Or maybe you have a forecasting budget and a board approved budget and a revised budget. That budget plan is how you differentiate those. So this is what you use for basic budgeting. These other items are all related to advanced budgeting. These three here are setup, so we're going to go ahead and start with these first. So the GL account set is where you can define a specific set of accounts for your managers to work with within their budget plan. So you can have as many as you like. You can see I have one here that is all my expense accounts. I could have one that is revenue and expense. I'm going to go ahead and create one that's very finite and just looking at my program expenses. Now I can list them individually here, but if I come up to actions, I can lines. I can create lines, which basically means I can put in a filter, and my program related accounts are in the 5600 range. So I'm going to say 5600 through 5699. So that creates my entry. I could have excluded my begin and end total. I like to include them. That's a personal preference. So I have this. I also want to show you though something, and you may have seen this already. So I have this. This is in my 5600. I created my range 5600 to 5699. If I add an account in my chart of accounts, it will get added or will give me the option to add into any account sets that exist. So I'm going to go ahead and add a new account in that range, 5650, I think. All right. So here is a message you may have seen before. And this is what it's related to, these account sets that we have for advanced budgeting. It's asking if I want to add it to any account sets. In this case, yes, I do. And I want to add it to this one. And it's going to let me know that it hasn't updated to any subplans because I haven't created a subplan that is using this account set, but it has added it to the account set. So let's give this a title. And let's move back then to budgeting. So if you've added accounts, now you know what that message has to do with, what it's related to. So if I open up program expenses, you'll see the account is here. The description didn't get caught and added here. We can add it manually, but if this account set were used on any subplans, the account will show up. The account description will show up. It's just a hiccup in sending it to the GL account set. It didn't pick up the description. One of the nice things here is it does pick up the description from the account for the ones we added, but you can change it here and it's only related to the account set. So if you have managers who don't really necessarily recognize how they're supposed to use a certain account based on the name in the chart of accounts, you can give it a different description for use just during this budgeting exercise. And that's the only place it'll show up. So it'll makes one extra element you can add to helping your managers do their budgeting. So those are account sets. And let me pause quickly here, see if there are any questions. Okay, we do have a question about subplans.
There is one here.
Yeah, we will get to subplans. That's part of actually creating the budget and doing the whole process. But I'd like to walk through the setup things. So I'll circle back with you. I think that's Haley, and make sure that we answer that clearly when we get to that section. All right. So those are account sets. Account sets are going to be required when you create the subplan, and partly to help make sure we talk this through, we've got our budget. And the subplan are what the managers look at. So you have to define a group of accounts that they're going to use in that subplan. The next option is spread methods. Spread methods are optional, but my guess is you will likely use them regularly. You have, when you enter the budget, when you're a manager and you're working in your subplan and in your versions, you can enter budget either by a total amount or enter it manually into different periods. If you enter a total amount, you want to tell the software how to spread it. So I may come in and say I'm budgeting 120,000 for the year, and I want it spread evenly across all my periods. That spread method is what's going to spread that across those periods. So let's go ahead and create a new one. You can have as many as you like. There are several different ways that you can spread. You can take a look at another account to see how it has in a version within the system to say how is this pattern, how is the spending, and create a percentage based on that spending. Historical trend can look at historical actual entries. You can do even across periods. I'm going to go ahead and do a percentage by period for 12 periods. And the first one I put quarterly at the beginning, starting with the first period. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the last period of each quarter. You'll need to total 100%, or otherwise the software won't know how to handle it. And that would be my spread method. So it will take, when I do my budget entry, it will take whatever total amount I enter and put it into each period. Now we're going to see all of these in place once we start working in the system, but I wanted to show you the setup. And one thing to mention, when you have one that is even across all periods, any overage or underage will, when it doesn't divide evenly across your periods, will land in the last period of the fiscal year. All right, so those are spread methods. And I'm making sure I've got my notes. Yep, I've hit the points I wanted to there. Any questions on spread methods? Okay. All right, the last one is budget allocations, and this one really is optional. So remember, account sets are going to be required. Spread methods are optional, but probably you will use. But budget allocations are optional, but they give you the ability to create an allocation across funds or dimensions by percentage. But I do want to give you a heads up. If you have a budget plan, and remember the subplan, if you have a budget subplan and you define on the subplan the funds and the dimensions and the accounts that the manager can work on, if you have one that doesn't include the values that are in this allocation, the manager will just get a message saying they can't use it. So let's say I created a subplan for a manager who can only budget for this program. If that manager picked this allocation, they would just be told you can't use the allocation because it involves a dimension that isn't part of their subplan. So let's go ahead and create another new one. And this time I'm going to do fund and let's see, oh, not 150%. And as with the spread method, we need to make sure that we hit 100%. So let me do a quick math. That's 60, so 40%. Okay. So when I use this, it'll allocate across, similar to line allocations that we have in the transactions, it'll allocate my budget across these values. So those are my setup pieces. Those are the things that you're going to need to have in place or may want to have in place before you go ahead and start your budgeting. So let's dive in and create a budget. Now remember, the budget itself is the overall umbrella under which all of these subplans are going to live. So I'm going to create a new budget, and let's call this fiscal year 2016B, just for my examples. All right, I'm going to have a start date. This doesn't have to match your fiscal period. You can have many budget plans and they can overlap if you have different reasons for having different plans. We talked about tracking a board-approved budget versus an original or a revision to the budget. You could, in that instance, that would be one reason why you might choose to have two separate plans so that you could report on the two separately. That would be one reason to have two different that were covering the same time period. You may want to budget by a project and have a discrete budget for one specific project, and that project may span 2 years. So the start and end date in that case would be maybe 2 years, and it may not match at all your fiscal year, start and end. So just so you know, you can enter whatever you need here for your specific budget. I'm doing mine to match my fiscal year. Balance account. This is going to be where the balancing entry for the transaction posts. Budget entries are like your actual entries where you have to have a balance, even though budget is a little different than an actual entry where you really want to make sure your debits equal credits. The software requires it. So we have generally recommended to clients that they create a specific account for budget offset. And that's what I'm going to go ahead and use here. The global administrator. Budget plans have a great deal of security around them about who can get in and who can change things. You get 2 admin users, and they are the people who can come in at a high level and make modifications to the different plans. And say, for example, they're the administrator who could send a submitted version back to the manager for revision. So I'm going to go ahead and add another user, and let's see, let's add Brandon. So now Brandon and I both can come in here and make some necessary changes if we needed to. So that's all that's really needed at the high level for the plan itself. Once we have the plan defined, then we're creating the subplans. And remember the subplans here, this is where the managers were making these up specifically for each individual manager to work on their area of concern. So I'm going to define a new subplan. And let's create this for manager Anna. All right, so when you are defining the subplan, you're defining what values that manager can access, what dimensions maybe are completely and totally skipped. You could leave some blank. There are rules, though, about how you put this together, what filter values you can use. For example, the asterisk does not work the way it normally works in a filter. So I would like to point out to you at this moment, in the online help, when you create budget plans and subplans, create a subplan, there's a table here in the instructions for creating a subplan that helps walk you through what your options are and how you might use the filtering for the subplan so that you can get the results that you want. So I'm going to specifically, if I list specific values, those are the only values that that manager can create or can post budget for, so, or enter budget for. So I'm going to say I want F200 and F210, cost center 200, and program value 2000 and 2100. If I left program value completely blank, for example, that meant that they would not be able to enter any value for program. We would only be budgeting at the first 2 dimension, the fund in the first dimension level. So I do strongly suggest that you take a look at the page in online help that gives you specific instructions about how the filters work. So I'm going to pick an account set code, and I'm going to pick my program expenses. Now remember, I said this one is required. I have to fill this out. If I wanted, I could give them a deadline. I'm not going to go ahead and do that for this example. The next step, you need to physically, or from a code perspective, a process generate. But before I can do that, I have to say who has access to this. So click User Access. And the preparer, this is the manager. So if I had a manager Anna in my list, that's who I would pick. I'm going to go ahead and pick myself, because if I don't, then I wouldn't be able to do the actual preparation of entering the data. I'm an admin, so I can perform certain tasks, but I wouldn't be able to do the data entry itself. So now that we've got that, I could add more people. From a preparation standpoint, I don't know how often clients would have more than one manager working on a budget at any one time. More likely, that's going to be just one person for their specific responsibility area. And then I generate it. So now when we come back here, and give this a second to catch up to me. Come on. Let me close that and refresh, or open the page to refresh it. There we go. We see our subplan. So eventually you'll have as many subplans as you need, and they'll all get listed under here. If I'm Anna and I've been given access to this subplan, when I come in here though, the only one I'll see is this one. The security will work so that they don't even see some other manager's budget. They don't have, not only would they not be able to access, they don't even see it in the list. So Manager Anna is ready for the next stage of the process. Before we move to that though, let's stop for questions and see if anybody has any questions, or if we've gotten anybody lost along the way.
I don't see any questions yet, but please feel free to use that questions box.
Yeah, you guys are being awfully quiet. You make me nervous when you're quiet. All right. Did we get a chat? I just saw something flash by. Nope. Okay. All right, so we've got the managers. We've created subplans for the managers. Now the managers are going to be coming in and working on their own subplan. So I'm going to come in. Let's pretend now that I'm Manager Anna. I have my subplan. If we look over here, we can see what funds and dimensions I'm restricted to. If I wanted to, I could add links. I believe there's a file attachment, so you can attach documentation along for the different information. My first step is to create a version. Now let's go back to our diagram for a second. That's where we have, these are underneath, if we think of it as a hierarchy, they're underneath the subplan. Manager can have as many as they want. I'm going to go ahead and create one. This one is just start with zeros. I'm going to start it with zeros, have nothing else involved. Let's go ahead and add that. It's created the version. Now I'm going to create a second version from historical. So you see there's several options. I can copy from a different version. Let's say I started off version 1 and I added a bunch of data, but I want to tweak it a little bit. I can copy that. I can copy last year's budget, last year's actual. I could even import from Excel. I'm going to copy from actual and take last year. I could average it across the period. I'm not going to bother, but I am going to increase by 5%. So it's going to take my actual entries to the dimensions and the funds and the accounts that are specified for the plan and increase those amounts by 5%. All right, so if we go back for a moment and take a look at the budget plan itself, we're going to start seeing the hierarchy. We're going to see the in-progress one is the most recent. As we touch these, only one will be considered in progress. Actually, I think maybe they're trying to remember. Once it's submitted, it has a status of admin review, and I can't remember if you have multiple versions as you're entering, whether the status is in progress for both or if just one is in progress. but it'll let you know what is out there for the manager. So let's go back. I'm going to take a look at the versions for this plan, this sub-plan, and let's start with 0, the from 0, 0. So for this version, we don't have any values posted. You can see these are just the accounts that I have defined in that account set, so that's all I see as a manager. Cost center filter is pre-filtered because it's the only cost center available for this sub-plan. And we can start talking about entering the data. So you have two ways that you're going to be entering data here into the version. Direct entry by total and direct entry by period. Let's take a look at the first one, which is by total. So I can define my account and all of I can do an allocation, my fund and dimensions, and I can enter an amount and use my spread method. So let's pick one account and let's do books. And I'm going to let's do a nice easy number. I'm going to 120,000. I have only 2 funds that were defined for my subplan, so they're the only ones that show up in the list. So your managers aren't going to have to remember which ones they're allowed to pick. They can pick whatever they see in the list, because that's what you defined the subplan to allow. And I'm going to do this one even across all periods. Now I've defined this, but it doesn't have the actual detail lines underneath that. What I have to do is generate detail. And it will only generate detail for the lines that you select. So if I had a few lines here, I'd have to select all of them. But it will be pretty obvious. It tells me I've got 120,000 remaining to generate. So if I generate that detail, if we look down here, we're going to see now for every single month, first of the month, it's taking $10,000, which is an even distribution of that 120 to that specific combination. And if we come back here, now we see we've got a total amount and a sum across the periods. I can go back in if I want to, let's say we do another to that same account, and this time do 60,000, but a different fund, and even. Again, we can see what's remaining to generate, and we'll do another row. And let's pick quarterly for this one. Okay, and we're going to have to generate the detail, each individual line. All right, so we'd have nothing remaining on these lines. If we come back here and give it a second to refresh, our sum by period, we know the total increased. Let's drill down on each individual month. We can see our 100,000 and dividing across each. This didn't refresh the way I would have expected it to. Hang on just a second. Let's close that and reopen it. Sometimes the refresh, because this is web-based, isn't always as immediate as we would like. So we can see we move, because we've got one of these that's quarterly. Each quarter we have a little more that we're putting in to the budget. So that's the first option, which is direct entry by total. Any questions on how you would use that or how that works or anything?
Yes, we have a question. Jess, it says, can you increase by 5% but only for income and decrease by 5% for expenses, or is it an across-the-board type of thing?
It is an across the board. Now, you would be able to do that if you created 2 separate subplans, one that used an expense, a GL account set for expenses, and one that used a GL account set for revenue. But then your versions are separate, and I'm not sure that would be the path to go. Otherwise, when you're creating that version, it is across the board for all the accounts in the set. good question. All right, anything else? Okay. All right, thank you.
I
All
don't
right,
see any.
all right. Now the next option is direct entry by period. This one is more for use when you don't have a particular spread method. You want to really do this hands-on manually, and you need to define your dimension value and your fund value up here. So we're going to do F200 and let's do 2100. We could, let's see, yeah, that's correct, entry type. So we can see what's already been entered for that combination of dimensions. And here I can put in real specifically by each period, and it's not a repeatable percentage. It's just what I'm choosing to define for that specific period. So you're not using that spread method. You're entering directly into each specific period what the budget needs to be for your combination there. And that does not have the generate lines because you've generated the detail here. So that's the second option for how you enter your data into the budget plan, the version. So that's one version. I could copy this version and create another if I wanted to, and increase these numbers by a percentage or decrease. I can do lots of different manipulation if I need to. I can add information about why I'm justifying, okay, you know, I'm increasing how much I spend, but I'm expecting a great big income bump because of this event we're doing in May, for example. So that's direct entry by period. Any questions on that? All right. Plan level reporting, let me walk through. You can modify the description. Plan level reporting, you can do a report on the overall budget plan. So by default, this will be checked for whatever version is the last one created. You can only have one version within a subplan that is checked for the reporting. So I can choose to display that lines without entries or with, and then the filtering. So if I wanted to take a look at what my budget for this subplan was by just one fund, I can filter that. All right, so that is, from the manager's perspective, the process they're going to do. And a manager, I should have said this at the beginning, I apologize. The manager who is doing this can be a limited user in the system to come in and just do this work, because they're not actually posting anything. They're doing just strict data entry. When they're ready, let's pretend that I've done all of my budgeting. I've got what I want. I've got 15 versions, but I've decided this one particular version is the one that's ready. I would go ahead and submit that. Oh, and I would trip over something I didn't anticipate. All right, so we're going to pretend that I have gone ahead and submitted that. I'm not quite sure what I did there that caused that, so I apologize. If I am that accounting person who's overseeing the budget as a whole, I would see that particular status should change to in administrative review. And when all of my subplans have one version that has been submitted and we're ready, I can review them. If I need to, you can send it back. Where is it? There is an option to, maybe I have to actually open the subplan. There is an option if a manager has submitted their version for you to send it back to them and reopen it for them to do some corrections if you need to. As an administrator, I believe you have the option. You can go in and do some modifying. And then when it is complete, when you've got everybody's submission, you've all agreed it looks good, then you would go ahead and post it to the ledger. So that is the process as a whole. I've gone through this fairly quickly, so please go ahead and ask me questions and we can dig a little deeper into the process. I do want to point out a couple of things. If I come into the subplans, let's say I defined a subplan for a manager and I got these settings wrong, you can come in and edit the properties if you are the global administrator on the budget plan as a whole. Most people aren't going to be able to come in and mess with this. It's just going to be those two administrators. So I could change the deadline or add the deadline and modify these settings. I cannot change the account set though. All right. Brooke, how are we looking on questions?
I don't see any new questions yet, but please feel free to type them into that question and answer box, and I'll read them aloud.
Yeah, you guys are making me real nervous here. All right. Doesn't really look like we're coming in with any questions. Hopefully you all found this useful. It's a nice tool. It's even a nice tool if you're the only person who is doing the budget. Because of the way the data entry works, it's a little easier than doing your budget in a spreadsheet. You can set it up with one subplan where you're the preparer and you do all your budgeting, but you can do that data entry. You can do the detail by the total and use the data entry by total and do the spread methods. And there are lots of nice options when you compare to working in an Excel spreadsheet that you import into the journal the way you would with basic budgeting. So keep in mind the intent of the creation of this tool was to serve when you have multiple managers working on finite portions of the budget, but it doesn't have to be used that way. It can be used for one person doing the budget as a whole and just leveraging the tools available in this. So, all right. Thank you all very much for attending. We will post this recording to the YouTube channel, and at some point it will probably be incorporated into the online help as well. So if you want to take a look at it, please go ahead and revisit it. And if you have questions, please feel free to reach out to our support team. I definitely recommend you guys get into your sandbox and play with this a little bit if you want to potentially use it the next time you do budgeting. And thank you all very much.